Today is day one of Canada's mandatory quarantine for anyone returning to this country from abroad. The federal government implemented the extraordinary measure at midnight overnight. That means it does not affect the 1 million Canadians who returned home last week. Meanwhile, thousands of Canadians remain stranded outside of Canada as borders close and flights are grounded in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. What lengths is this government prepared to go to bring them home? Earlier, I spoke to Foreign Affairs Minister François-Philippe Champagne. Hi, Minister Champagne. Thanks very much for making time for us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Minister, I want to start off with your government's repatriation efforts, the efforts to bring Canadians who are stuck around the world home. What kind of update can you provide our viewers? I'm going to ask first specifically about India. I saw your tweet last night. Obviously, there's been a big lockdown there. Where are your conversations with your counterparts in that country about bringing Canadians home from India?
So if I talk about India first, I had discussion with the Foreign Minister of India. What we're doing now is how we can facilitate commercial flights for Canadian travelers which would be stranded in India. It's an enormous challenge because of the size of the country and the type of restrictions that have been imposed. But I remain hopeful that we will be in a position to provide more details to Canadians in the coming days or perhaps even today to tell them the result of our efforts with the Indian authorities. But let's be honest, Vashi, it's becoming increasingly difficult to bring Canadian travelers back home because we're facing unprecedented challenges. We're facing airspace closures, airport closures, border closures, restriction of movements within countries. We have been able to repatriate Canadians from I would say more than 10 countries now. We have facilitated flights probably in quite a number of countries. We have tens of thousands of Canadians which have been able to return home. We're always looking for solutions. We have negotiated air bridges, for example, with Europe. We have worked with Air Canada, with WestJet, with Air Transat, with Sunwing. I think that what we're doing now, it's probably the biggest repatriation of Canadians in Canada's history, in peacetime at least. So everyone is focused. We had about 10,000 calls, 14,000 emails of Canadians. We have 600 people in our operations center on a 24/7 basis. We're doing everything we can to help people, but it's true. I'll always be straight with Canadians. It's becoming increasingly difficult to bring people home.
Given the warning that you just issued, that straight message that not everyone is going to be able to come home, something we've heard from the Prime Minister as well, do you think honestly that there will come a point where you will no longer be able to get planes and get Canadians back?
The situation in these countries which are being taken to protect the health and safety of their own citizens, a bit just like we did in Canada, is making international travel more and more difficult. And yes, there'll be a time in the future where we will need to shift at some time in the future as to how we can best support people who would have to stay where they are for the period that these quarantine are in place.
Minister, statistics from the CBSA show that 959,000, just a bit more than 959,000 Canadians, more than 43,000 permanent residents flooded back into this country between March 14th and March 20th. Your government, though, didn't apply, I should say, the Quarantine Act to those arrivals until yesterday. Should you have done so earlier?
Well, I would say half of the people you mentioned are our snowbirds, people who came back by road. And then we have also a number of travelers. And just let's be clear, those are Canadian tourists which had a return ticket book, which are trying to come back home, which we are.
Yeah, I'm not taking away from their ability to come back. I'm just asking whether or not you should have made it mandatory for them to self-isolate earlier.
So our advice to self-isolate has been there for days now to make sure that people were self-isolating at home. And I've been saying that. And we have been very clear in our advisory to people. It's not only to protect their own health, it's to protect the health of their families and their loved ones and also of their community. What we've done yesterday is to make it mandatory. Now the law requires people to do so, but I would say I trust Canadians. Canadians understand that the best way to protect their own health is to follow the advice of the public health official, both federally, provincially, and locally. And I would say that Canadians know from day one when we have said, you better come back home because it's becoming increasingly difficult to commercial means. We have been clear that people need to self-isolate. what we did yesterday is to make sure that people understood this is the law now. People need to respect the law and self-isolate for their own protection and the protection of their loved ones.
Is your government, I know you've already taken action at the U.S. border, is your government considering further action at the border? And I'll tell you why I'm asking. For the past 2 days, we've heard the President of the United States sort of downplay the public health aspect of this and emphasize the effect on the economy. In fact, he said that there's the possibility that the U.S. will, quote unquote, open back up by Easter weekend. Does that concern you? And are you considering more aggressive measures at the American border as a result of that language?
Well, I would say, Vashi, we took the unprecedented step of closing the border between Canada and the United States. And I think this was the right measure. We take our decision on the basis of the facts that are presented to us. But I would say at the same time, when we take decision, Canadians expect us, obviously, to protect their health and safety. But we also need to ensure economic security, food security. So that's why when we take this decision, we need to take a step back and think about all the implications and making sure. That's why you saw, for example, some exemption for essential travelers, like the truckers who bring food across the border, medication across the border. So I would say the measure we took was proportionate in light of the circumstances, and we will continue to review the measures that we need to take and take that in the context that we need to ensure the health and safety, economic security, and food security of all Canadians.
I take your point, most especially where food and economic security is concerned. But I guess I'm asking because it seems like those circumstances under which you made the decision or which you based the decision on are very quickly evolving. I would note, for example, New York State, a state that we share a border with, has seen a surge in cases, more than 25,000 confirmed cases. They're increasing at a very rapid rate, 210 deaths. We know that the expected need for beds far outweighs what they have available there. And we are continually hearing that language from the president that he expects the country could be back up and running in just a few short weeks, while public health officials say the opposite. Is it the view of your government that those circumstances have changed? Is it time? I totally understand economic and food security, but is it time to reevaluate the measures at that border?
Well, we always look at the circumstances that they're presenting. I mean, we're facing a crisis of unprecedented proportion, and that's why we have based our decision on science, on the advice of medical experts all along the way. We will look at the circumstances, but I would say, Vashi, to close the border between the United States and Canada, this was quite unprecedented, and obviously we took it because this was the right decision to protect the health and safety of Canadians. But let's be clear, we have $2 billion in trade every single day with the United States. And to your point, we need to make sure that whilst we close the border to protect the health and safety of Canadians, actually our border now is closed to all travelers. And this was to protect North America. But certainly at the same time, we need to understand and reflect on the impact. That's why now, as we speak, only people who have essential travelers can cross that border. So I would say, as we speak now, we have secured the border. We are obviously monitoring what's coming up south of the border, and we are cooperating, consulting, because if there was a time in the history of the world, I would say, where we need more cooperation, more consultation, more coordination, this is it. That's why yesterday I had a call with our G7 partners. The Prime Minister had a G20 call today as well, that we need, because this is an enemy that knows no border. It's invisible, and humanity is united to fight against that virus. And that's what we're doing. We're taking the measures that are needed and reassessing every day what needs to be done to protect the health and safety of Canadians.
All right, Minister, I'll leave it there. I appreciate your time very much today.
Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.